when you think about music in general, right? You guys listen to songs mostly. Is that correct? And songs have typical structures, right? There's a verse, there's a chorus, there's a bridge. And you typically have instruments playing, or even if it's hip hop, you're having drum machines and other things making synthesizers and sampled things, but they're things that are structured in a way that very often we're used to the form and how those forms evolve. And that's one way to go, but there's a lot of music. There's a lot of other ways to think about assembling music, right? There's this story that I think it was at the end of Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. There's like this weird thing at the end, and they had somebody play something on a keyboard into the tape, and then they took the 4-track tape out and they sliced it up into, like a couple of hundred slices, and then they threw the slices up in the air. They landed on the floor, and they just picked them up randomly and reassembled everything back together, and then that's what ended up on the album. Right, so there's this random events. Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, he's a 20th century composer. He did a lot of work with that. John Cage is another composer, 20th century American composer, who did that. John Cage is the man who famously wrote the piece 4 minutes and 22 seconds, which is where a pianist comes and sits at a piano and opens up the music, and then at 30 seconds, he turns the page. And then maybe at like 1 minute and 45 seconds, he turns the next page. And then at, 4 minutes, he turns the last page. And then at 4 minutes and 22 seconds, he's done playing. He hasn't touched the keyboard. Right? That's, what he's getting at there is that you go someplace and you expect the performer to communicate with you. But once you slow your mind down and you just listen to the sound that's around you, that can create its own symphony. So that's kind of like the concept behind that. And so there's lots of ways of constructing music. Now, when you're, scoring to picture, you're sometimes given a picture that has no steady tempo. And you end up learning how to place things on a timeline depending upon what's going on with the image. And I played that piece with all those found sounds. I basically placed them in time where I thought that they would unfold into a really interesting structure. I assembled it. I didn't compose it like you would, piece of manuscript paper or like jamming on the box and laying tracks down on each other. Didn't do any of that. Gathered my materials, and like a sculptor who welds things together, right? Goes to the junkyard, grabs all these things, looks at them, thinks about them, and puts them together into a piece, welds them, nails them. Maybe he alters them a little bit by burning them or chopping them in half or whatever, painting them. He's taking materials and organizing them. So music is organized sound. We'll be taking sound materials and organizing them into a narrative. Now, if you want to add some traditional, like a drum beat here or there or whatever, or some other, virtual instruments, plugins, you can do that. But let's just see how far we get with just using this concept. All right, so I have a little presentation. Assemblage. This is something that Pablo Picasso made, Still Life, 1914. The use of assemblage as an approach to making art goes back to Pablo Picasso's Cubist constructions, the three-dimensional works he began to make from 1912. An early example is his Still Life, 1914, which is made from scraps of wood and a length of tablecloth fringing glued together and painted. Picasso continued to use assemblage intermittently throughout his career. Scraps of wood, tablecloth, glued together and painted. And I guess that's mounted to a canvas. Right? So now, when we're looking at this, there's something in art called the rule of thirds. Do you know have any idea what that is?
I think it's kind of like the distribution of your subject in the frame.
Right. So just think that there's a tic-tac-toe board on here. Right? Now, notice, this is not exactly right, but notice how he has this set up. He has this part outlining the top, being the bottom border for the top third, this part here for the bottom third, right? And here, this probably is like right in the middle of this. This is a little bit, see how this is too big? So, if let's see, I can adjust. Wow, look, do all this in, man. All right, so that looks a little better. That looks a little more even, right? You can, if I just adjusted these things a little bit, just by following the outline of what he did, I get a much closer to a perfectly, all these boxes being the same size. And see how he has distributed the entire construction, right? The top of this line goes along this right here. The bottom of this back bit follows this line, and then this goes underneath. And then this object here is right, a lot of it is on this line here. Whoops, excuse me. Is on this line here. And that's right. And then you got this angle here that you can sort of draw from up here. If we go from here, you see that? How there's this angle between this piece and this piece, and it's not exact. It would be a mathematical figure. These are broad strokes and outlines, right? But you could see how if the geometry of this, and also the way that it's distributed, because you sort of have something going, from here. Whoops. Right? You see what I mean? How like the geometry between all these things fits together. And that's just, I don't know whether he consciously did that or that was his innate artistic sensibilities. But those things were not placed as random events. So much incredible stuff happened in Paris, mainly in the first 20 years or so of the 20th century, maybe up until the World War I started. Then things got a little difficult. Stravinsky moved to Switzerland, and he worked there. But a lot of artists, Paris was like the center of the art world, music and art and dance and theater, and opera. And so all these people lived around each other and they sort of influenced each other. Sort of like 1950s New York City. You had incredible jazz musicians. You had incredible visual artists, the whole New York school with Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns. And before the guy, Jackson Pollock, moved out east, and also Willem de Kooning and my friend, the late Larry Rivers. Yes, I did say friend. I'll show you some of his works shortly. The way that they just dominated the art world from New York City in the 1950s and 60s. It really was analogous to what was going on in Paris in the early 20th century. Anyway, so in 1918, Dada artist Kurt Schwitters began to use scavenged scrap materials to create collages and assemblages, and he called this technique Merz. Assemblage also became the basis for many surrealist objects, inspired by psychologist Sigmund Freud's writings about the unconscious and dreams. Surrealist objects often combined unlikely combinations of found objects to create surprising and unsettling sculptures. Excuse me. So here we've got a metronome by a guy named Man Ray, who is a very well-known artist. Usually he had his dog with him. Right? So he's got this eyeball paper clipped to the arm of this metronome. Which is odd. It's a little weird. So 1923, remade in 1933. Here's this guy, Merz. This is 1968. Right? Again, if you do the thirds thing, you can see how, right, you got this angle. The way they took this photograph is kind of cool because they took it at an angle, and you could just see how they've framed that. It's almost like a sculpture. So in the 1950s and 60s, assemblage became widely used. Artists Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg. So Jasper Johns he did a lot of stuff with American flags. And there was another guy named Roy Lichtenstein. He did all those things that looked like cartoons, like cartoon frames with usually a woman saying, "Oh, what did Brad do to me?" Or a guy, saying, "Oh, how did I mess this up?" It's always some angst-ridden thing. They actually, at the Times Square subway station, there's a Lichtenberg. It's like right as you're coming up from the 2 and the 3 train, right in the north part of the station. You could see it right up. They put that up about 5 or 6 years ago. It's really cool. I think it's made out of tiles. So, anti-aesthetic approach to making art. They used scrappy materials and found objects alongside messily applied paint to create expressionist reliefs and sculptures, earning them the name Neo-Dada. Artists of Italian Art Povera movement, such as Mario Merz, made artworks using an assemblage of throwaway, natural, and everyday materials, including soil, rags, and twigs. Their aim was to challenge and disrupt the values of the commercialized contemporary gallery system, right? So this looks like it's twigs, something from a bush or I don't know. It looks like some sort of dried, parts of a bush, maybe even charred a little bit. So this stuff is still going on. This is from 2000, right? Sarah Lucas. As a technique, assemblage continues to be extensively used. Sculptures of Sarah Lucas, Damien Hirst, and Jake and Dinos Chapman, many contemporary artists, create large-scale installations from assembled, scavenged materials and found objects. This is in color. I don't know why they have it in black and white. This is the Smithsonian Institute. This is my friend Larry Rivers. He passed away 20 years ago. I knew him, I first met him when he was younger than me, a little bit younger than me, and I was in my early 30s. And I played, he also played saxophone, and he had a jazz band that I played in for about 18 years, part-time. We'd get gigs in the East Village. He'd have an opening somewhere, and we'd fly to Aspen, and he'd be doing a lecture on the relationship between jazz and his art, and then we'd do a performance where we were playing his songs. his really weird Thelonious Monk kind of, they're really greatly written. He wasn't a great saxophone player, but he wrote really cool tunes, and we had a good band. The musicians were really good in the band. So, you know, I got to see him personally, how he worked at his studio on, he owned a building on between 14th Street and 13th Street. So it was a block long between A and just east of First Avenue. There's a McDonald's on the first floor. And he lived in the 5th floor, and then he eventually sold all the other lofts that were there, that were split up into half. So there were 2 on each floor, but he had an entire floor. Actually, funny story. Do you know who Allen Ginsberg, the American poet, is? A beat poet. He was contemporary with Jack Kerouac. So Allen Ginsberg, who I actually performed with a few times, he sold all of his archives, his writings, his photographs. I mean, he had like this incredible photographic collection from the beat and the hippie era, because he was friends with Bob Dylan. I mean, he knew everybody, right? And he lived in 13th Street. And then he got a ton of money for that. And then he bought one of Larry's, one of the apartments that Larry had in his building. And this was, you know, like 1994 or 5, or maybe even earlier than that. And I'm talking to Larry about a rehearsal, and he goes, "Hey, just guess who bought an apartment downstairs?" And I'm like, "Who?" He goes, "Allen Ginsberg." "Yeah, he paid 350,000 Ginsbergs for it. I never knew being a poet was so, paid so well." Anyway, it's just kind of funny. You had to know the both of them. So this is the history of the Russian Revolution, and it's like a bunch of constructions, right, that are all put together. It's with some painting, some wooden boxes. You notice how right here it sticks out of the canvas. They're at different levels. Whoops, excuse me, wrong way. So, like, in other words, some stuff is right on the canvas, and then some stuff there's foam board that they've cut and pasted and glued on, and so it's a painting might be sticking out of the canvas like that, and painted on the back of my hand, right? So it gives it like a 3-dimensional look, and also it looks like it's been assembled. Found objects, sometimes referred to by the French term for found object, objet trouvé, may be put on a shelf and treated as works of art in themselves, as well as providing inspiration for the artist. The sculptor Henry Moore, for example, collected bones and flints, which he seems to have treated as natural sculptures as well as sources for his own work. Found objects may also be modified by the artist and presented as art, either more or less intact, as the Dada and Surrealist artist Marcel Duchamps' ready-mades. So Duchamp, he's the guy who put the toilet bowl in the museum. And he said that a toilet bowl was a piece of art, right? So I bet if I Google Duchamp, the first image you'll see is a toilet bowl. Yeah. Right? It's like all right. As so often, Picasso was an originator. And the amazing thing about Picasso was that he was alive while I was alive. You know, like I was alive in the 1960s. He was still alive, as was Coltrane and Aaron Copland and Stravinsky, and Louis Armstrong. As so often, Picasso, from 1912, he began to incorporate newspapers and such things as matchboxes into his cubist collages and make his cubist constructions from various scavenged materials. So extensive use of objects was made by Dada, Surrealist, and pop artists. So a pop artist, anybody know the most famous, I know this is not an art class, but it's all related as far as I'm concerned. The most famous example of a pop artist, Andy Warhol, soup cans, right? Campbell's soup. Yeah, so found object, and that's sort of like what you're doing is a combination of the assemblage and found art. So this is Robert Rauschenberg, and he lived up on West 96th Street near Broadway for a long time. and that's where he did a lot of his work. But these are newspaper clippings and photographs that he has put together, along with some things that he painted. So these are all like on some sort of canvas that he glued on. And, you know, he colored stuff as well, and he probably treated this to make this blue. So he processed it, or, you know, he would add to it, right? So he's like putting reverb or EQ or compression or a chorus onto a sound, or pitch shifting it down, right? It's all relatable, all this stuff. That's why I love looking at art. Here's another Rauschenberg. A couple of umbrellas. And all these things are found pieces from a magazine, from a newspaper, Cocktails for Two, Bloody Mary, that he assembled together, and he put these two umbrellas so that it gives it a three-dimensional aspect to it. They stick out from the wall. This is a French artist, Jean Tinguely and Yves Klein. This is a collaboration. And these are just things he probably found in some of the stuff in the junkyard. So that's the first thing we saw. Just aside from the color, right? Aside from one is on a piece of canvas and the other is made up of a bunch of found objects welded together probably. What can you think of like one of the biggest differences between these two bits? Okay, there's something happening in every square inch of this, right? Even here where there's white, you can see that there's strokes. Even up here, you can see that it's been painted in. On this one here, there's negative space. This area here, this area here, this area here, all the stuff where there's nothing happening. There's negative space, right? There's, you know, the wall is what you're seeing. But look at these things. You know, they're really incredible. I wouldn't want to have one of these in my house. I would have that one Rauschenberg with John Kennedy in it. That's pretty cool. You know, I could just put that on a wall. But this, you need like a room for it. Unless you made this weatherproof and you could leave it out in your yard. You know, my friend Larry he also had a house in Southampton. And in front of his house, he had these 20-foot tall legs, women's legs, made out of metal. And it was like really controversial. It's really funny. He got a lot of like grief for that. Okay. Let's look at another Rauschenberg. So you could see that, you know, what decade is this portraying? '60s. Walking on the Moon, Robert F. Kennedy, Vietnam, Janice, Martin Luther King, John Kennedy. You know, it's powerful, right? He didn't paint any of these things, but he put them together in a way that made it incredibly powerful. Oh, is this Patty Hearst up here? That's who that might be. Is this the Chicago 8? That's who that might be. You don't know who the Chicago 8 was. The 1968 Democratic National Convention. It was Abby Hoffman, who I also met and did a performance with, Jerry Rubin, and a bunch of the Students for a Democratic Society, the SDS. They were protesting the Democratic National Convention, and they all got arrested. And then there was a big trial, which was a joke. The judge was an idiot. You know, I don't know who was in the right, who was the wrong, but the judge was a jerk in that. I've read many books of that. Anyway, I think that's who these guys are up here.
It's like Janis Joplin in there too.
Correct, in the
red.
upper right-hand corner in red.
And I think I saw that. Isn't that Rodney King? Maybe.
No, Rodney King is the 1980s.
Oh, my mistake.
Martin Luther King is right here. Right here. In his coffin. I'm not sure who that is.
I thought that was Rodney King. Maybe
No, that's definitely not Rodney King.
Light it up.
This is definitely about the 1960s, and Rodney King was much later than that. Oh, 1991. Yeah. I don't know if Rauschenberg was alive in 1991. Oh, look, it's 76. Is that what that says there? Can't tell. He's signed and dated. So this is he made prints of this too. So that's what this is right here. Right here. So it's the number of the print and the total number of prints. Okay. Let's look at Jasper Johns. Right, so he did all the stuff in the back, and then he did the stenciling, and then there's some other stuff that, did he paint this, or was this stuff that he put on here? This looks like it could be painted, right? As does this, and certainly that looks painted. But I'm not sure about that. I also met him once at a Larry Rivers gig. And then here's another Picasso. See, notice what's so great about Picasso. He's got so much space. You know, these are like in your face. There's just a lot going on, or the Rauschenberg in particular. You know, the bright colors, right? Really interesting. And this is a larger picture of that first one. So the idea is there's a couple of ways, there's a few ways of going about this, right? One way would be that you decide on a form beforehand with some broad strokes, starting out simply for 45 seconds. Then I'm going to build the textures, right? I'm going to make it something that's like an arch shape. And, you know, it's going to be quiet for like 40 seconds, and then it's going to start building for 20 seconds, and then maybe for 10 seconds it gets to the peak, and then for 30 seconds it drops off a little bit, and then for the last 15 or 20 seconds it goes down to nothing. Right? So you can have a concept in mind and how you construct that with your objects. That's one way that you can do it. Another way is to just play around with it until you get what you want. You know, you just put stuff in and, oh, that sounds cool. But what you have to realize is you have to keep track of how dense the music is at any point. You know, like in film class yesterday, in other words, if I were going to just do something, just using the piano, for example, and I was going to improvise a piece for you. Right? I only had a couple of moments where things got dense. There was a lot of space. There was a lot of airiness, right? But it built up. So if I was going to do something that was like an arch shape, right? And I was going to improvise something that was an arch shape. Let's say I'll do something that's a minute long. So I changed the pace of how things came in as it was getting dynamically changed, right? And so when you're writing music, you know, you get these sounds. Where do they live in the frequency spectrum? Are they low? Have you treated them so that they become low pitched? You know, so you need to make sure that when you're layering things together that, you know, there's some clarity to it. Right? Like the Picasso, it was clear what he was doing on that one on this. It's so clear what he's doing here. There's so much space, light colors, right? Yeah. Okay, so what kinds of sounds did you guys acquire over the last week?
I actually recorded like the bus announcing the bus stop that I was arriving to at Queens College. I also recorded like the elevator sounds like when I went in. I also got like the fountain that's like in the center of the campus, and I also got some nice like cricket sounds when I was walking back home. So that was nice. Those
are all kind of like textural stuff, right?
Yeah.
So there's two areas where I would say that you would want to try to find a few more sounds, and that would be something that will make a pitch, a definite pitch, and something that would be you could use for rhythmic activities.
I got a couple of those that I was able to get, but I do think I need more though.
All right, good. How about you, Adrian?
I got a lot of like kind of beeps and boops kind of sound because at the hospital, you know, there's all types of machines and things like that that are making sounds. I got some kind of, you know, pitch sounds off my PlayStation from the menu. I did I mean, I have a drum kit, so I didn't go crazy with it, but I got a snare from kind of far away, and a single splash cymbal, like some stuff like a glass bowl, a cup, a receipt printer, like a label printer, so kind of stuff like that.
So, right. So, you know, so Claudia was talking about she got a fountain, right? So a fountain is a long sort of evolving sound with lots of random elements in it. Do you have anything like that?
Um, I got
Like a
uh,
rainstorm, or something, whatever.
I got my sink running, and I also got kind of ice in a cup being swirled
Okay,
around.
good, good. So there's random elements happening. The thing to do also is to make sure that you got, like, if you have ice in a cup swirling around, that it's not so fast that you can't hear the individual clicks of the ice against each other or against the side of the bowl, so that it does not sound like, hey, what happened? Gee, my piano quit. You're fired, piano. So that it's not, but like it kind of random rhythmic stuff. But that's something that you can do. All right, so I've got all of these hits, right? This, just different pitches. All right. So first thing I want to do is I want to separate these out, and I'm going to create something with these. So I'm going to make sure I'm in slip mode. I'm going to make sure the tab to transient is turned on, right? And then I'm just going to place my cursor there and hit tab and hit the letter E, and then hit tab again until I get to the next one and hit the letter E, Command E. Right? Are these are all the same? No, they're not. Let me make this bigger so you can see it. So tab, letter E, tab, whoops. That didn't work for some reason. Letter E. Tab, and then Command E. Tab, Command E, tab, Command E, tab, Command E, tab, Command E, tab, Command E. All right, so I've got all these individual little clips, right? Now, what I could do is change my time base to minutes and seconds and turn off the grid, right? So let me just start. The first thing is that I want to set up some panning for all of these things. So let's get all these to the beginning, at the beginning of the session. Okay, and then I'm going to solo this one here, and I'm going to pan this one over to the left. So when you have a stereo file, right, what I typically do when I'm panning is I take one side and I just move it over to the direction I want it to be in, or even if I just put it at 0, that's fine. I find that better than, switching the position by having this over on the right and this on the left. It's not nothing. And then I want to get rid of some of this blank stuff here. And then this maybe stays in the center, and then this maybe goes a little bit to the left. Maybe this one stays in the center also. So let me get these out of my way. And maybe this one goes all the way to the left, and this one goes all the way to the right. Let's see, let's drag this one over here. All right, let's see what we got. Oh. Okay, so we need a little bit more action in there. All right, and then we might want to, we can get busier. So I'm just, creating some random stuff here. And we could have something that's maybe one spot that looks like that. And then maybe that gets repeated. Right, with, holding down the Option key and just dragging that. And then you've got like a really bizarre little groove there. Right, so it's kind of random. It's not really, it's in time, but it's not really in time. It's a little off. It's a little twisted. So, I'm just making something up here and just playing around with things. And maybe I'm going to take one of these and I'm going to go to Audio Suite and I will go to Pitch. Let me do the Avid because I only use Avid plugins. Pitch 2, and maybe this will go down. Maybe I'll do something where I unlink this and then this will go down, I don't know, 20 semitones. 22 or 21. And this will go down maybe just, oh wait, hold on. That doesn't matter. Maybe this will just go down 10 semitones. Let's listen to that. Now, in your headphones, I don't have original sound on, do I? Okay, it's on now. So this should be stereo. It's got a really weird sound to it. I'm gonna render that. And let's see with this one here. Maybe what I'll do is I will harmonic. Let's see, what do they got? DC distortion. Where's lo-fi? This is an ancient plugin, typical of Avid, right? This plugin's been the same since like 2004. Maybe bring the sample rate down. So when you bring the sample rate down, it turns down the high frequencies. And then render that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to chop that off. Just do a little fade out at the end. All right, that's too long. I just want a short hit. All right, let's see. You see, so I'm just, playing around with stuff, and I'm just, and then what'll happen is I may play around with this for a while and then maybe start adding in some of the other sounds, and then some of the stuff might get muted because it might get to be too busy, so I'm listening as I'm working and I'm adjusting. You can always just mute these clips by highlighting it, and then Command M like Mary, and then that doesn't exist. It doesn't play back anymore. It's still there if you want to get it later. So let's say I only want this first two, but I might want the third one. So I'll just mute it for right now. And then I might import some of my other sounds in here. Where did I put those? Oh, okay. So I took this video a couple days ago. I'll get the audio off of that, right? Let me drag that to my desktop. So what you can do is, if you take, you could take, and that's another thing, is you could take videos. So I'm going to import audio. I'm going to go to desktop, and then it's this one here, convert. And so now I've got like a, and then maybe we can, I'm going to plug this in directly, but I want you to do sends instead of this. Now, what's also something that you could do is you could take our EQ31, and then this, the Buttermilk Falls, could be animated. So how do you do that? I'm going to select low pass filter. Right here, these two boxes, that's plug-in automation enable. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to select the frequency, and I'm going to add that. All right, and then if I click where it says wave, I can go down here and select frequency, and that's what it'll show me. And then I can draw in some frequency automation, which moves this, or actually, I mean, if I wanted to really be fancy, I could use the random one. We went over that once before. Let's do this. Let's make the, go to grid, and let me make the grid 1 second. So every second it's going to change. And then, all right, so then at some place you want to make it sound a little bit more animated, you can delete this, and then you could change your grid to 100 milliseconds, right? And then I think that this will, yeah. This is going to be on, you know, all the big hit stations.
I'd buy this, Professor.
But you see right there, I mean, right? There's an idea. Look at that. Right? This little section right here. That's kind of funky. Bah, bah. Now, you hear that's kind of funky, right? So check this out. What you can do then is you can bounce that funky waterfall as a wave, and you're at 24 bits, and then import after bounce. Right here, you select import after bounce. So you bounce it, and it's in a new track, and it's right here. So then what you can do is you've made yourself a loop, right? So I could just... I mean, the possibilities are endless. It's just, you know, using your imagination and knowing the tools. You know, the better you know what's possible. I mean, you could do that. What I just did, you could do that in any of the DAWs. It's not just Pro Tools specific, although working with audio is easier in Pro Tools. It's not difficult in the other software. It's just easier here. But you can do all this stuff in Logic or Cubase or Reaper or anything else. So once you're done with these classes, you could take these techniques and just transfer them over to whatever software you choose.
I actually remember doing something similar to this on Audacity for high school.
Right. Okay, so next week, what I'd like to see is your found sounds edited, named inside of Pro Tools, and if you're going to do any treatment like transposing them down, adding some distortion, right? And so one thing you can do is, let's say we don't need to, we're not going to use an instRiff right now, but if you see there's comments right here, you could turn that on right here, and then you could just type here EQ1 low pass auto, right? So that I know what that treatment is. Funky waterfall. This is loop rendered. Where's that one really weird sound? Let's see. Oops. Right. I mean, right there, like that's looping because I've got loop turned on here. But, you know, even that. You could just duplicate that. Right, and then like you layer it with the other one. And they have nothing to do with each other rhythmically, right? But if you, I could imagine how they would work, and I sort of made them fit in, right? I knew it was going to get a decent. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but I knew it was going to work. So that just comes from experience of doing this stuff. But this is pitch shift down. So I just keep in a diary of what I've done to the sounds. You know, so get them. Don't start making a piece yet. Just get all your materials in, treat them all, and then, you know, like if you're going to work on one, just solo that track. Or what I would do is maybe you can mute all the tracks, right, and then just unmute the one that you're working on.